What is up, guys? I'm Spiel, and today I just wanted to take a minute to talk about reverb in dance music for a while. Now, in particular, I want to talk about reverb in the kinds of dance music that tend to get very busy at times, like dubstep. When you're starting out, it's easy to make the mistake of applying too much reverb to everything, because you want your sound to be as big and as huge as it possibly can. At least that's what I did, because applying huge quantities of reverb to everything just seemed the way to go, to make everything bigger and huge and more exciting. But at some point I realized that all this reverb was really messing with my mixes. I couldn't get a clean and popping mix out of my track, no matter how hard I tried, because there was just this huge layer of reverb over everything, drowning and masking out other elements that came behind elements that had huge reverb tails. And I really didn't want to get rid of all the reverb because it was making my song sound so big and huge, but I just couldn't get a good mix out of it neither. So thankfully, there is a great and simple solution for this dilemma, and in Reason, we actually have a very convenient way of achieving it. And what we want to do is we want to gate our reverb tails so they don't run loosely out of control after the initial punch, but they rather disappear and make room for elements that follow behind the element that triggered the reverb. And in Reason, we have a very convenient way of doing that, and it's a simple button on the RV700, which is Reason's main reverb, and it's the gate enable button, together with the whole gate function down here in the programmer. But before we get into that, I just want to give you a quick example so you actually hear what I'm talking about. And I've prepared a quick dubstep drop. It's nothing special really, but when we listen to this now, I want you to pay close attention to the reverb tails and just generally the reverb going on and what it does to the overall mix. Alright, I have prepared the exact same file, and just with one difference. In this file, all the reverb tails are gated. So I have enabled a gate on all the reverb units, so that when the audio signal stops, when there is nothing coming into the reverb anymore, there is also nothing coming out of the reverb. There is no reverb tail when there's no audio coming in. And this way, we make a lot of room for elements that come after our initial element that triggered the reverb. So let's take a listen to this and just try to listen for the difference in reverb. And especially with the vocal shout right at the end there, the damn, you could really hear that there's a huge difference from this version to the last one. Because in the last one, it was not that easy to actually discern what the voice was saying, while here, it was very clear and punchy. I intentionally brought the level of this audio clip down a little bit of the vocal, so it was harder to hear in the track or in the project beforehand with all the reverb tails, but you could really make it out in this one, and the whole thing just sounds a lot more punchy. Let's take a closer look at the chords right here, and let's just see what each of the reverb settings do to change the sound. So first up, here are the chords without the gate enabled. And while they sound very big and nice and stereo, we have these huge reverb tails going on, which are going to mess with our growls coming in after the chords. And it's actually, when you master your track, you can actually visually see that the growls coming after the chords are being lower in level than the chords themselves were, because in the limiter, these growls have to compete with the reverb tail coming from the chords. So you're taking the focus of your mix away from the growls, where you actually want the focus to be in that very particular time frame, and you're just creating this reverb layer on top, which makes it harder for the listener to hear what's going on, and that can really kill your dubstep drop. So now how do we fix this? We just enable the gate, and our reverb tail is gone, but we still have that nice kind of atmospheric and authentic feel to our chords. To highlight that even with the gate enabled, the reverb is actually still adding a lot to this chord patch, we're just going to take a quick listen to this without any reverb at all. And you can hear now it sounds really dead and digital, because that's pretty much all that it is. It is just a simple synth patch. But adding the gated reverb to it adds a nice authentic layer to it, gives it a nice room to breathe in without creating this huge reverb tail that will mess with our mix. So when you're loading in a new reverb, let's just do this really quickly here. All you really want to do is you might want to load up a patch and adjust the dry wet, and then enable the gate here on the unit itself. And in the programmer, we have a couple of parameters that we can now use to change the way our gate behaves. Most prominently, we have the threshold, which is standard by default set very low, because usually with all these synth patches, there is no input at all when we don't play it. And when we release the note on a synth patch, it usually disappears quite quickly, even though that depends on whether you have a release or not. So you might want to adjust this threshold parameter, but in my case, where we have a very kind of square-ish envelope on this synth patch, having it this low is actually no problem at all, because when I play, you can see that when the audio comes in, there's literally no attack, so the reverb comes in just as the audio comes in, and when the audio disappears, there is almost no release, so the reverb disappears with the audio. And you have a couple of more parameters right here, for example the trigger source, which enables you to use a MIDI or CV signal to trigger this gate. So you can do some funky stuff with the reverb, but in our case, we really just want the reverb to disappear when there's no audio coming into the unit, so having the trigger source on audio is just fine. Very important are the parameters over here, which are labeled hold and release, because they affect how quickly the reverb will disappear after the audio has stopped coming into the reverb unit. When you bring up the hold by a lot, the gate will still leave all the reverb through for this amount of time, and it will only start to gate the signal to reduce the reverb signal after this hold time has expired. And then it will release the signal in the time frame that is configured here with the release parameter. I like to keep both of these parameters quite low, so we get very little bleed, very little reverb going after our signal has disappeared. So usually you want your hold to be like at 10 or something, but do experiment with these settings and find out what goes or what fits your style of music best. Alright, I hope this video helped you out in some way. Of course, always trust your own ears more than you trust me. That's what I do when I listen or when I look at tutorials. Keep in mind that these are things that other people do and you don't really have to do them if you don't feel it sounds right. If you're making like very chill and atmospheric music, you definitely want to keep some of your reverb tails around because they add a lot to this kind of atmospheric and chill genre of music. But if you're throwing around bass patches and huge chord patches of all different kinds, and you want your track to be really quick and full of energy, you might want to consider gating your reverb tails so you don't mess with your mix and everything can be clearly discerned and heard the way it is without reverb tails of previous elements masking it up. Right, that's that. Have a good one of whatever you're having, guys. I'll see ya next time.